I am Mohammed bin Salman, better known by my initials, MBS. I'm 34. I am Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I am accused of having murdered a journalist and kidnapped a foreign leader. I'm waging a bloody war in Yemen and repressing any opposition. People think I'm impulsive and unpredictable. Yet they receive me with full honors. My kingdom holds the world's largest oil reserves. It influences the whole world's economy. I possess the Muslim holy sites. I am the Western world's arms industry's biggest client. I'm a key partner in the fight against terrorism. I'm carrying out reforms that will both transform my country and enrich you. I'm indispensable. I am your ally. But you have to pay the price for that. What is he thinking, Mohammed bin Salman? What's he up to? He could, on the death of his father, rule Saudi Arabia for decades and become a familiar figure in tomorrow's world. His and our futures are entwined. MBS's father, Salman, ascended to the throne of Saudi Arabia on the 23rd of January 2015. At 85 years old and in poor health, his first act was to designate a crown prince to succeed him. Power in the House of Saud isn't passed from father to son, but between descendants of the founder. Salman's choice fell on the powerful Mohammed bin Nayef, known as MBN. At 56, a long-serving interior minister and graduate of an American university. The king surprised everyone by appointing his son to the strategic post of Minister of Defense and the Economy. At just 30 years old, MBS, his father's favorite son and raised in his shadow, had no government experience. This appointment of a virtual unknown was most intriguing, far beyond the royal palaces. And to New Yorker Joseph Westphal, the new United States ambassador, Riyadh's guardian.
I was very new there, and I asked, who is that? So I did a little, what you normally do in the world today, you Google somebody, you know. I started Googling a little bit and trying, on my own, trying to understand. So I asked for a meeting with him.
For the royal family, behind the closed palace doors, his youth, far from being a handicap, is an asset. For these are perilous times for the House of Saud. The new minister has come to his uncle's house, accompanied by his children, to attend a family reunion. This aging and wealthy generation knows that it's running out of steam and disconnected from the real country. Half of the kingdom's 34 million inhabitants are under the age of 25. They feel aimless, and here, in the homeland of Wahhabism, they're suffocating under the weight of all that's forbidden. The Sauds fear that they will eventually revolt. During a visit to a US aircraft carrier off the coast of Saudi Arabia, the new minister confides in the ambassador.
I understood, and we talked about this a lot, that Saudi Arabia was headed for a disaster here. Very large, extensively large, young population, very connected to the rest of the world, with lots of expectations.
The Sauds are still shaken up by the Arab Spring that 4 years earlier saw the people rise up against their dictators. Protest movements regularly break out, only to be quelled. The feminists are calling for basic rights, such as the freedom to drive or the curbing of the powers of the religious police.
He understood the dilemma his country was in. We talked about bringing back cinema, bringing music back to the kingdom, and art and culture, and he was definitely in favor of opening all of that up. But he was also, and I have to give him credit for this, I mean, he was not naive to think that he could do that just by virtue of ordering it. Again, it's a conservative country, so he understood the politics of this.
The prince knows that if he ever wants to transform his country, he must first make his mark. To this end, he surrounds himself with a new generation of totally dedicated advisors. Ali Shihabi belongs to the Saudi elite who were educated abroad. A Harvard graduate and a banker, he leaves it all behind to serve MBS.
You need a strong leader to affect change. If you're going to be a weak leader, nothing will happen. And one of the problems in Saudi Arabia, yes, we've had no, drama over the last 30 years, but also very little has happened. I saw in him special qualities, particularly strength of personality and boldness. And frankly, you need that.
And indeed, at the very gates of his kingdom, there are plenty of opportunities to prove himself by confronting his country's enemies. In March 2015, in Yemen, a poor country to the south of Saudi Arabia, the capital Sana'a is taken by rebel forces. The Houthis have the backing of that sworn enemy, Iran. The regime of the mullahs has long sought the fall of the House of Saud, whom it accuses of being the pawn of America and defender of an impure Islam. The Sauds feel besieged by Iran and its constantly expanding presence in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and now in Yemen.
لولا وجود رجال أمثالكم باحترافيتهم وقدرتهم وعزيمتهم ما نقدر نسوي شيء. فبيض الله وجهكم. إن شاء الله من هالشيء وزود إن شاء الله.
2 months after taking office, the young defense minister orders his army to go to war. Without even notifying his American ally, he launches an aerial bombing campaign.
You know, people say, oh, he was a young man, he's impulsive, he decided to go to war. Absolutely not. Prince Mohammed didn't want to pick up the phone and call the White House because the Americans are always saying, you want to fight Iran until the last American. So he said, no, we're going to do it. And he went to war. an Iranian ally takes control of Yemen was totally unacceptable.
MBS may well feel confident. Of course, it's the first time in its history that the kingdom has waged war, but it has the fourth largest military budget on the planet and the support of its Emirates ally. A more seasoned leader would know, however, that the defeat of a guerrilla force is never a sure thing.
I've spoken to him about Yemen, not just through WhatsApp, but also in person. Initially, there was a sense that this could be won quickly, and my argument was that a war cannot be won militarily against the Houthis. And that one has to think of other ways, negotiation, patronage. He listens. I'm sure I'm not the only one who tells him this. And he says, just listen to what the Iranians say. They say death to America. They say death to Al Saud. He's compared Ayatollah Khamenei to Hitler. I mean, he sees Iran as a revolutionary state that will not stop until Saudi Arabia, the regime in Saudi Arabia, is destroyed.
بسم الله وعلى بركة الله حلق فوق أبنائه.
If MBS won't listen to calls for caution, it's also because this war can lend him the stature of a warlord. It's an entirely new image in a country hitherto ruled by cautious old men. The war is popular, and it makes him popular. In reality, though, his army is gradually getting mired in a bloody and ruinous conflict, and with no way out. From 2016, the country is even targeted by Houthi missiles. So, MBS turns to his allies.
Well, he felt very strong that something should be done. He wanted more help from us to help him defeat the Houthis. But we were very committed to a peaceful settlement of that issue.
His allies are under pressure from public opinion that's shocked at the use of Western weapons in a conflict that's creating millions of refugees, famine, and much loss of blood.
The decision was made, we're going to support you, not with military force, but with technical assistance and support to make sure that your forces can protect your sovereignty.
The West has been very careful. America has been very careful not to get involved in an offensive way, in any offensive way. But clearly, Saudi Arabia has spent a lot of money and built its military on the West, and it requires ammunition, it requires supply. And if that does not come, Saudi Arabia will take its business elsewhere. This is not foreign aid coming from the West. This is being paid for at top dollar.
MBS feels let down by his closest allies, and above all, by America. Barack Obama, whose country no longer depends on Saudi oil, is disengaging from the Middle East. Worse still, when he goes to Riyadh in 2016, it's to their amazement to announce the signing of a nuclear agreement with the sworn enemy of the Saud.
None of our nations have an interest in conflict with Iran. We welcome an Iran that plays a responsible role in the region.
The first problem is that they felt that they had not been consulted. It came out as a surprise because there was this secret back channel that they felt that this was an administration that was going too far to try to reach a deal with a country that they considered an enemy.
To build trust and resolve.
If Saudi Arabia is being treated like this by its historical ally, that's also because it's getting bad press in the West.
And finally, true and lasting security also depends on governance that serves all its citizens and respects universal human rights.
Off camera, there's a revealing incident.
The president was very concerned about the penalties that were given to individuals for a Twitter message. They'd be sentenced to 1,000 lashings, 10 years in jail, 16 years in jail, and the president would point those things out.
The king responded in some way, and then before the meeting was over, Mohammed bin Salman stood up and spoke, which is quite unusual.
The young minister even goes so far as to tartly suggest the US president took a course in Saudi law.
This is our system, we have our courts, we have our judges.
That was the striking moment of that visit. It was clear, I'm overstating it, but it was pretty clear who was boss, or at least who really had the ability and the capacity and the desire to push back, and it was Mohammed bin Salman.
Within the US administration, some are alarmed at his rise to power. To their eyes, the bloodshed only confirms his reputation.
I covered the intelligence community and paid fairly close attention to Saudi Arabia, and people on my beat, in the U.S. intelligence community, the CIA in particular, who were very unnerved by Mohammed bin Salman. They thought he was extremely young, untested, and there was a sense that he was impulsive and that he had a very kind of binary view of relations in the Middle East. They thought might even be unstable because they have so much intelligence on what goes on inside the palace.
Quite the opposite of the experienced Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef. Now, more than ever, the favorite of the Americans.
The Americans cannot decide who becomes the successor in Saudi Arabia, but in Saudi Arabia, there's a game or a competition between princes as to who has the most and best access to the United States. If the person who is selected can then develop a special relationship with the President of the United States and show that he has special access, that works to reinforce his power base.
Six months later, it's a whole new game. MBS is pleasantly surprised to see entering the White House a man opposed to Obama's Iranian policy. The prince is forever trying to convince his father to send him, not MBN, to Washington. In March 2017, he gets his way. At the time, an advisor to Donald Trump, Steve Bannon is in charge of the Saudi dossier.
When MBS first came over, he was deputy crown prince. He was not the crown prince. That was what I felt pretty extraordinary. And so when people said he's impulsive, yes, maybe he is impulsive, maybe. But I also thought that the royal family had thought this through enough that, hey, if they're sending the deputy crown prince, maybe this is the guy.
For MBS, this trip to Washington is a rite of passage.
Today we are facing a very serious danger in the region and in the world. Either when it comes to the hostile activities of the Iranian regime that is supporting the extremists and terrorists in the region and around the world.
Those 3 or 4 days in Washington were very intense because it was constant meeting after constant meeting. And what I saw was someone that was very well prepared, had been well briefed, knew what he was talking about. And what's most impressive is this charisma and dynamism.
He can charm anyone he encounters, from the number of people that he met, people who are extremely cynical, were charmed by him. And he knew exactly which buttons to push, what message to present in order to be charmed by him. It's a skill.
When it suits him, MBS knows how to use this other facet of his personality, especially when it comes to convincing a former businessman of his desire to reform his country.
We were very impressed. He's very impressive. Number one, just this kind of fundamental restructuring of the Saudi Arabian economy, and which he's trying to open up to the Western world, or trying to open up to modernity. He has a sense of urgency. That fit very well with Trump, because Trump, being a business guy, is that, let's get on with it. Things should be happening today. My sense was that MBS was the same way.
With Trump's seal of approval, he has just one more bridge to cross. 1 month later, on June 20th, 2017, in a palace in Mecca, this scene is filmed. Despite appearances and all the marks of respect, his cousin is forced to cede his place to him.
أنا بنرتاح الحين وأنت الله يعين.
ما نستبعد عن توجيهاتكم ونصحكم الله يسلمك. موفقين إن شاء الله. في بلدكم دوام الله يطول. موفقين. الله يعزك. MBN will no longer appear in public, no doubt placed under house arrest. The ambitious Mohammed bin Salman is appointed heir to the throne. Just 2 years after arriving in the spotlight, he has managed to impose himself and to prove himself in the eyes of his father. The infirm King Salman takes a back seat and hands the power to him. At 32 years old, he's in control of a kingdom. Without delay, the new potentate makes some decisions that are both spectacular and symbolic. Within months, he has abolished the religious police, the mutawa, and granted women the right to drive and even not to wear the veil.
والداعمين لها. هنا لدينا قصة جدا جميلة. أخ يدعم أخته، فهو من أحضر هذه السيارة قبل دقائق من دخولنا منتصف.
Finally, he allows public concerts and cinemas, all previously banned. He's brought to the homeland of Wahhabism a veritable revolution.
سبعين % من الشعب السعودي أقل من 30 سنة. وبكل صراحة لن نضيع 30 سنة من حياتنا في التعامل مع أي أفكار متطرفة. نحن فقط نعود إلى ما كنا عليه. الإسلام الوسطي المعتدل المنفتح على العالم.
MBS is shaking up the powerful religious establishment, until now a pillar of the monarchy.
We all expected that he would face a lot of opposition.
The religious will either have to go along with it, like this leader of the influential Salafists, or suffer the consequences.
What he did months before the law came out that would allow women to drive, he arrested about 70, 80 clerics and sent a very powerful message. I will not tolerate any resistance from you. I think it has worked. The grumbling has been very, very quiet.
A few months later, MBS sends a Western acquaintance on WhatsApp this video of a rap concert with the comment, "It was either this or the Islamists."
I cannot believe I am standing in Jeddah right now. My heart is pounding. I want to feel I'm part of this. So thank you.
So, is MBS a progressive? Even a feminist?
Whenever I have spoken to MBS, I see that, ideology is not very important. Survival, political power, adopting policies that are pragmatic and practical, that lead to the survival of the dynasty, is much more important.
It is indeed about survival. By opening up his country, his goal is twofold: to offer an indispensable breath of oxygen to young people, and to the Western world to present a better face at a time when that is sorely lacking. For the kingdom he is inheriting is on the edge of a precipice. The House of Saud may well be as rich as Croesus, but it's incapable of funding the country's lifestyle. Its 34 million subjects pay no taxes, no water or electricity. 2/3 of them are employed by the government, often doing nothing. However, 80% of the kingdom's revenues come from oil. Its price is collapsing, and in the last few years has halved. And the worst is yet to come. Western demand is decreasing, and in a few decades, the reserves will be depleted. Already, 12% of the population are living below the poverty line.
In Saudi Arabia, you'll be shocked. In Riyadh, forget the rest of the country. We don't have a bus service. Can't take a bus in Riyadh. There is no metro. There is no sewage network. The bathroom water in every house goes to a hole in the ground that everybody has to dig, and then every other month, somebody has to come and suck it and take it somewhere. And this is almost 80 years after we started to export oil.
The word austerity is for the first time entering the Saudi vocabulary. No more public servants are being hired. Subsidies have been reduced, and the first taxes introduced. But that's all a stopgap. In the long term, MBS knows that he needs a modern and productive economy. And he knows he can't do it alone.
Mohammed bin Salman's survival depends heavily on foreign investment to create modern Saudi Arabia, less dependent on oil. If he doesn't deliver the economic promises, then he will have no legitimacy in Saudi Arabia.
In the autumn of 2017, the prince holds a lavish conference in Riyadh for an audience of Western businessmen. He needs both their money and their talents to develop infrastructures and businesses and to create jobs.
Something of a revolution happening here in Saudi Arabia as the kingdom looks to growth.
His plan is called Vision 2030. 2030 as in the predicted end of the oil money.
Your Highness, you have foreigners, foreign businesses watching. What do you need most to make this a reality?
كل عناصر نجاح موجودة لخلق شيء عظيم وكبير داخل المملكة العربية السعودية. فبعد وجود كل هذه الفرص والمقومات وأرض شبه خالية، بدأنا نفكر لماذا نبني مدينة وزون بشكل تقليدي. لدينا فرصة ننتقل إلى جيل جديد.
To attract investors, he proposes a series of projects on a pharaonic scale. The largest expanse of solar panels in the world. A tourist city aimed at attracting 2 million tourists a year. A giant-sized industrial city. And Neom, city of the future on the Red Sea, 100 times the size of Paris and populated in part by robots.
أن لا نعمل فقط إلا مع الحالمين، لأن هذا المشروع ليس مكان لأي مستثمر أو أي شركة تقليدية، هذا المشروع فقط موقع ومكان للحالمين الذين يريدون خلق شيء جديد في هذا العالم.
Potential investors are anything but dreamers. All the tens of millions spent on communication, huge conferences and videos leave them, at best, skeptic.
It was good, but it's somewhat unrealistic. I mean, I think there's this tendency on the part of Saudis and to have these big events and bring in top people, and at the end, you don't get much from that.
To finance his economic projects, he still has his crown jewel, the oil company Aramco, with its brand new headquarters. He's hoping that its partial privatization will bring hundreds of billions into the kingdom's coffers.
We have the vision, the resources.
But even this prospect is met with skepticism from investors.
But at Saudi Aramco, we've taken it one step further.
The Westerners are taking their time. But patience isn't one of Mohammed bin Salman's qualities. His reforms are stalling. The civil servants are dragging their feet, and the state coffers are emptying dramatically. But MBS comes up with one of his typical solutions. In October 2017, he has 380 businessmen and princes, among the richest and most powerful in the kingdom, sequestered in a big hotel. They're accused of corruption and forced to hand over part of their fortune. This brings $100 billion into MBS's coffers. But this extraordinary purge scares the Western investors it needs to seduce. The long detention of Prince Al-Walid makes them think.
This is my Diet Pepsi.
The richest man in the country, a world-class economic player, shareholder in Disney, Apple, and Twitter, ends up ceding part of his fortune to the Crown Prince.
Prince Al-Walid had been a client of my firm back in the early 1990s. It was pretty shocking in the fact that these are very prominent businessmen. So clearly some pretty major changes were going on.
It was a very original way of addressing a very serious problem, which is elite entitlement. Somebody once asked me, he said, oh, well, he bought a yacht. I said, yes, the country can afford one yacht. It can't afford 50 yachts. So it's a question of, we had many centers of power, and each one was very expensive for society.
Ali Shihabi is alluding to the yacht that MBS has just bought for himself, worth $500 million, plus the most expensive house in the world and the most expensive painting. Bought for $450 million in November 2017. The young prince is ambitious to modernize his country, but subject to his power and under his total control. And although he grants his subjects some new freedoms, he doesn't tolerate any political dissent. This academic will be imprisoned, as will many prominent feminists who claim more than the right to drive.
The political climate in our country is very bleak. It is the worst since the foundation of Saudi Arabia. We have the greatest number of political prisoners, the largest political executions.
You know, he has arrested people. You have reduced the margin of freedom of speech. But I think that during this period of tremendous change, as you're going over, you know, a waterfall, you have to hold the country very tight. You need somebody authoritarian who comes and says, I'm going to do this. This is the law. This is the way we will do it. And you will have to follow. Because if you let political forces loose, they can go out of control. The best bet you can get is to get a benevolent autocracy. Now, that's an art. It's not a science.
And indeed, when despotism, however enlightened, is combined with both inexperience and a quick temper, it can be an explosive mixture. In the autumn of 2017, MBS overnight orders a land and air blockade of its neighbor, Qatar. He accuses it of supporting his Islamist enemies, the Muslim Brotherhood, and of holding talks with Iran, but also of giving airtime on its channel Al Jazeera to his opponents, as here a certain Jamal Khashoggi.
Jamal, let me start with you. You've compared your crown prince to Putin, to Iran's supreme leader. You've said he's creating, quote, an interesting form of dictatorship. How so?
I still see him as a reformer, but he is gathering all power within his hand.
When the embargo doesn't make the Qataris bend, one of MBS's advisors goes so far as to suggest digging a canal to turn the peninsula of Qatar into an island. Soon after, MBS kidnaps a serving prime minister. The Lebanese Saad Hariri, who is also a Saudi citizen, is invited to a picnic in the desert, arrested, and forced to resign from Riyadh. MBS accuses him of being too easy on Hezbollah, Iran's armed militia. In the face of international outcry, the prince accepts the mediation of the president of France, traditional protector of Lebanon. MBS had set a trap and had to find a way out. Macron was there for 3 hours. And the meeting was tense, because Emmanuel Macron explained the rationality that should preside over relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, implying that Mohammed bin Salman's current behavior was irrational. The prince ends up releasing Saad Hariri with a check for $1 billion to Lebanon by way of apology. He doesn't want his impetuous methods to harm the projects so crucial to his future and that of his kingdom. So, in the spring of 2018, he launches a huge charm offensive aimed at Westerners. To promote himself, MBS has the largest communications budget in the world and employs the biggest public relations agencies, as well as an army of lobbyists. It opens a lot of doors. It's like a big rock star tour. In 3 weeks in the US, a week in London, and 3 days in Paris, he visits Silicon Valley and Hollywood, meets bishops and rabbis and former American presidents, visits the Louvre, and tops it all off with a gala for the who's who of Washington.
I think naturally, as a young crown prince, as somebody who's changing the country, who's open to the world, who wants to be an ally of the West, who's a charismatic person, he was attractive.
Ladies and gentlemen, the man that you all would like to hear from, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
He owes it all, not just to his checkbook, but also to his image. And above all, to his reforms to women's rights, which he hopes will overshadow the arrests of his opponents.
What I represent is the change of this community, that is, the integration of the man and the woman.
Women issues are important in the West at this particular moment more than any other time in the past. And therefore, these kind of issues drive Western reporting on women in Saudi Arabia. And the ban on driving was actually highlighted by Western media.
Mohammed bin Salman, arguably fooled a lot of people. I think people very much wanted to believe the narrative of Mohammed bin Salman, this idea of this very young, ambitious, kind of open-minded leader in a place that we don't associate with anything approaching Western democratic values, and he was saying all of the right things and seemed to be moving in that direction.
MBS is hoping his economic projects will benefit from it all. For the time being, it's still him signing the checks.
$3 billion, 533.
12 billion on weapons. The price he pays for American protection.
That's peanuts for you. Should have increased it. $880 million, 645.
How could the prince not feel that he has the world at his feet? And that he can rule his kingdom as he wishes?
Mohammed bin Salman has this kind of hit team, if you like, toughs that are around him. At the same time that they're his enforcers, they're also his closest advisors. So this kind of network that you've seen Mohammed bin Salman build around him to go out and be the pressure or the muscle on people who he feels threaten him.
The increasing repression. The number of death row inmates doubled since he came to power, such as these teenagers from the Shiite minority. The abductions of opponents abroad. None of this draws any reaction from his main allies.
He has been given a green card. He has been allowed to get away with all sorts of domestic, regional, and international crises.
Hi, everyone. Today we have a very important...
There is some dissent, of course.
...very prominent Saudi journalist.
Is also maintaining the old ways of repressive system. Actually, he's expanding at that. And he's totally, he doesn't need it. There is no opposition to him. I just don't understand.
Jamal Khashoggi is a former close friend of the Sauds, who later became an opponent. A renegade, therefore, to the eyes of MBS, as well as a traitor through his links to the Muslim Brotherhood and Qatar. For some months, he has been ever more challenging, even writing editorials in the Washington Post.
Jamal Khashoggi knew a lot. He can puncture the narrative of Mohammed bin Salman in Washington.
Les Saoudiens sont réduits au silence. Les choses ne sont pas transparentes et ce n'est pas un bon environnement pour les réformes en Arabie Saoudite.
The fact that Khashoggi chose Washington to be there to write critical articles annoyed Mohammed bin Salman. When Mohammed bin Salman was spending millions of dollars on lobby groups, on think tank, in order to improve his image in Washington.
Everyone has their price, so Khashoggi is offered a position as an advisor to the Crown Prince. He refuses. On October 2nd, 2018, MBS's own brother assures him that there's no risk in returning to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, where he has to sign his marriage papers. A team of killers from Riyadh, including MBS's personal bodyguard, puts him to death, then dismembers his body to get rid of it.
In a diplomatic facility in a foreign country, it's just so risky and so completely out of the ordinary that I think that was first just very stunning. Second, there was just a lot of grief. I mean, within our newsroom, there were people here who were his friends and who knew him and worked with him.
Jamal, you know, God bless his soul, really. He was a journalist, but with very clear political views. And, you know, in this environment between Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Qatar, we take advantage of their dissidents, they take advantage of our dissidents. You know, our security services overreacted to that, and it was an incompetent, it was a disaster at all levels, really. Disasters happen, you know, unfortunately.
The real break in the story came some weeks later when we were the first to report that the Central Intelligence Agency, the main intelligence agency in the United States, had done their own assessment of the situation, drawing on their sources and their experts and their knowledge, and determined that this was almost certainly an operation that Mohammed bin Salman had directed.
The murder stuns the whole world and sparks a global scandal. Any other leader would not come out of it unscathed. 2 weeks later, MBS summons the son of the deceased to the palace and, accompanied by his father, who thus shows his solidarity, offers his condolences. The prince's response to the affair is to announce the indictment of uncontrolled elements.
هو حادث بشع غير مبرر تماما. هذا الظرف المؤلم لإحداث شرخ بين المملكة العربية السعودية وبين تركيا. أريد أن أرسل لهم رسالة من هذا المنبر. لن يستطيعوا عمل ذلك طالما موجود ملك اسمه سلمان بن عبد العزيز وولي عهد اسمه محمد بن سلمان في السعودية. أبغى أختم فقط في حاجة إنه دولة الرئيس سعد جالس يومين في السعودية فأرجو ما تطلع إشاعات إنه مخطوف. في كامل حريتي.
There on the stage of his annual economic forum, MBS can afford to swagger a bit because he knows that he has the full protection of Trump's America. And to be sure of that, he knows how to get his message across.
In a text message received from MBS after the Jamal's killing and murder was that he was so disappointed in the way the West was immediately blaming him that he would look elsewhere for allies and friends in the East, meaning China and Russia.
He told you that?
Yes. And I mean, clearly this was also a message that he wasn't just transmitting to me, he was hoping that I would then transmit it to others, that he was looking at other options.
At the G20 summit of world leaders held the following month, MBS follows up on his SMS. Quite visibly. The West cannot afford to lose this troublesome ally. He has another message too. If his reforms fail, it could lead to chaos in an already unstable region. The messages get across. Any condemnation from his allies is minimal, and his personal responsibility in the Khashoggi case is never officially suggested.
I saw it and then heard the accusations later. It certainly shocked me, and it didn't seem like, although on a very limited basis, the individual I had seen. But people at state, others, said, hey, look, we've gotten the intelligence reports back, and we sign off on what the Saudis are telling us.
The West is obliged to deal with this prince with two faces, the reformist and the tyrant. Mohammed bin Salman is a reflection of their own weaknesses and of their loss of influence in the world. One that reveals their own flaws, their cynicism, and their mercantile nature. And as for the prince, how long can his Highwire act last? To survive, he has to make it all work. But in his own kingdom, the many enemies he has made, princes, opposition, or Islamists, are biding their time. And outside it as well. In September 2019, his rival Iran strikes at the heart of his wealth, his oil, and all his expensive armaments can't protect it. In the face of Iran, Saudi Arabia is more alone than ever more bogged down in Yemen and unable to push back its greatest regional enemy. And there lies the paradox of this young prince. He attracts to his land missiles, as well as pop stars. He wants to embody modernity, but he's forced to live a cloistered life, like a despot from ancient times.
He's worried about his personal safety. Someone like him is quite vulnerable to an assassination attempt. The system that he has around him, including people who taste his food and before he eats it and all the rest of it, cooks, double cooks, triple cooks, and so on, is fairly elaborate, and his security is strong. Unless he's assassinated or some act of God, intervenes, he is going to succeed, he's going to become the next king, and he will rule for a very long time.
On the death of his father, perhaps he will be king, and will become, for decades maybe, a familiar figure in our world.
النشاطات داخل المملكة العربية السعودية هناك قفزات فلكية في الثلاث سنوات الماضية، وهذا الشيء بلا شك سوف يستمر لأننا نعيش بين شعب جبار وعظيم. أنا أعتقد أن أوروبا الجديدة هي الشرق الأوسط. هذه حرب السعوديين، هذه حربي، مصاف العالم.